Conducting a hypothesis test, steps. The type of hypothesis testing we're doing in Chapter 8 is called hypothesis testing for population proportions. There are other kinds of hypothesis testing, for example, hypothesis testing for means. So if you guys want to look up how to do this online, like Google it or something, then you should look up hypothesis testing for population proportions. Now, we're going to use certain steps to do our hypothesis testing, and the steps are summarized here. So we have 4 steps: hypothesize, and in this step we have to use the information given to state a null hypothesis and an alternative hypothesis. Step 2 is quite involved. We get ready to test by stating a significance level, choosing a test statistic appropriate for the hypothesis, state and check conditions required for future computations, and state any assumptions that must be made. We're going to do step 2. I'm going to go through what these are in more detail in this video. Compute to compare. So we're going to compute an observed value of the test statistic and compare it to what our null hypothesis said you would get. We're going to find a p-value in order to measure our surprise. And then the 4th step is we're going to use what we just did to decide should we reject the null hypothesis or not. And we're going to make a statement about what this means in terms of the context of the data. Now, there will be a video in here of just conducting an entire hypothesis test, so we'll go through every single step and do a hypothesis test, but that's not this video. This is just to outline the steps. And right now what I'm going to do is just walk you guys through number 2 because it's a little bit more involved than the other ones. Okay, now when I say get ready to test, state significance level and choose a test statistic appropriate for your hypothesis. Significance level is something that you are often given, but if it's not given, the standard is 0.05, and so you can use that one. It's something that you choose or are given, so you don't have to compute it with a formula or anything. Choose a test statistic. For this chapter, we're always using a specific type depending on the type of hypothesis test we do. So in this section, we're always using a 1 proportion z-test statistic. So you don't have to worry about choosing it, you just always use z-test statistic and then calculate it using the formula that we learned in section 8.1. Now, what does it mean to check the conditions and then state any assumptions that are made? Well, we have specific conditions that we have to check to make our arguments valid, and I'm going to show you what those conditions are on the next slide. And then assumptions, occasionally we don't know if one of the conditions is true based on the info given, and you have to just say that we'll assume that it's true. Okay, here are the conditions that you will have to check as part of step 2. So you have to check random sample, so make sure your sample is collected randomly. Large sample size, we have to make sure our sample size is large enough that you get 10 expected successes or more and 10 or more expected failures. This is something that we've already done before. You do this thing where you multiply n times p and make it sure it's bigger than 10 or equal to 10, and then n times 1 minus p and make sure it's bigger than or equal to 10. So just a tip, you guys have checked all these conditions in a previous chapter, so it's very similar to something you've done before. Now, large population, if the sample is collected without replacement, then the population size is at least 10 times bigger than the sample size. So this is that whole thing where you have to multiply 10 times n and make sure that your number is smaller than the whole entire world of that makes up the population. And then step 4 is independence. Each observation or measurement must have no influence on any of the others. And so step 4 actually is one of the ones where you often just have to make the assumption that it's independent. So when I said state any assumptions you make, a lot of times step 4 you have to make an assumption that this is true. Okay, so as I said, we'll see in another video an example where we actually check these things.